The sky above the alien city burned with colors that humans could barely comprehend. Jagged towers, alive with glowing veins of energy, stretched toward a violet sun that cast long shadows over the streets below. Amid the alien architecture, a single human warrior walked with a steady calm, his boots echoing against the crystal pathways. To anyone who knew him, he was ordinary in appearance, a man of average height, with short brown hair and eyes that held nothing but quiet resolve. But those who dared oppose him learned quickly that he carried the strength of 1,000 battles within him. In the heart of the city, a young alien noblewoman moved like liquid grace. Her skin shimmered with subtle golden patterns, her eyes bright and calculating, reflecting her determination to rise above her circumstances. She had grown up in the shadow of the alien queen, the ruler whose judgment was absolute and whose will shape the fates of millions. This young noble had been trained in combat, diplomacy, and cunning, yet she had always felt the sting of insignificance. Humans, she had learned, were weak, fragile creatures. They were loud in their confidence and clumsy in their gestures. They were not to be taken seriously. And yet the human warrior stood in her path, unshaken by the court's whispers and the dangerous games of power she had perfected over years. The moment she saw him, she decided she would not bend, not even slightly. No human would dictate her actions, nor influence her fate. Her pride, sharp and gleaming, propelled her forward like a weapon drawn in challenge. "I will not step aside," she said, her voice ringing through the marble hallways. Her words were a melody of authority, a challenge carved in sound. "I will face this trial on my own terms. No outsider can tell me what to do." The warrior did not flinch. He merely inclined his head slightly, his expression calm but unyielding. He carried no visible weapons, but the aura around him was undeniable, one that spoke of experience, resilience, and a humanity that had survived against odds that would have crushed even the strongest alien. She approached him with a calculated confidence, circling as if testing his defenses, probing for a weakness she could exploit. He met every motion with patience, his stance unbroken, as if the world itself slowed to measure his resolve. She had expected hesitation, fear, or even a moment of doubt. Instead, she found a mirror, calm, unyielding, and impossible to intimidate. Her heart began to race, though she could not admit it. She had faced beasts, storms, and warriors greater than herself, but there was something in this human that unsettled her completely. He did not attack, yet every step he took was an unspoken command of space and presence. Her arrogance, so carefully constructed over years, faltered. "You are different," she finally said, almost a whisper, not wanting to admit the respect her mind was forced to acknowledge. "No human should be able to stand like this, yet here you are." He answered with a single, quiet statement. "I do not stand because I have to, I stand because I choose to." The words struck her in a way she could not explain. They were simple, yet full of weight. In her culture, words were often polished and elaborate, a sign of status and education. Yet his were raw, honest, and carried the kind of conviction that no alien diplomacy could match. For a fleeting moment, she saw not a man, but a force of nature, a current strong enough to sweep away pride and fear alike. But pride is stubborn. She lifted her chin, trying to reclaim control, to remind herself that she was trained, capable, and untouchable by a mere human. "You will not sway me," she said, but even as she spoke, a tremor ran through her. The air shifted. A presence made itself known, powerful, regal, and impossible to ignore. The queen had arrived. Every creature in the hall instinctively knelt, save for the human and the young noblewoman whose defiance now seemed almost reckless. The queen's gaze swept the room, sharp and discerning, and finally rested on them. "You doubt him," the queen said softly, but the weight behind her voice made it sound like a decree that could topple mountains. "You think a human cannot match your strength, cannot influence your fate, yet you do not see the truth." The young noblewoman stiffened, sensing that a revelation was coming, though she could not anticipate the impact. Her defiance had brought her here to this pivotal moment, where all her assumptions, all her beliefs about humans, were about to be challenged in a way she had never imagined. The queen's eyes met hers, piercing and unyielding. "He is not just a warrior, he is yours." The words hung in the air, twisting reality, reshaping the narrative she had believed for her entire life. The words of the queen echoed in the young noblewoman's mind like thunder striking glass. "He is yours." She staggered slightly, as if the floor itself had shifted beneath her feet. Her heart pounded violently, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and something else she could not name. How could a human, one she had long thought fragile, unpredictable, and incapable of true power, be tied to her destiny in a way she had never imagined? The human warrior remained silent, watching her with that calm, unwavering gaze that both unnerved and intrigued her. It was as if he knew the storm of emotions raging inside her and yet chose not to disturb it further. She wanted to speak, to challenge the queen, to reject the idea outright. But no words came. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, faltered. "You cannot be serious," she finally whispered, her fingers gripping the edges of her tunic. "Humans, they are weak. They cannot understand the weight of what binds us. They cannot survive in this world." The queen's expression softened, but her authority remained. Strength is not always shown in scales or weapons. The human you see before you has endured trials that would have broken the strongest alien warriors. He has survived not because of size or claws, but because of choice, courage, and the will to protect. Those who underestimate him pay a price. The young noblewoman looked at him again, searching for any sign of deceit, any hint that this was some trick of the queen to control her. But he remained still, the calm in his stance unbroken, the quiet strength radiating from him undeniable. She felt a strange pull, a mixture of awe and fear, as if standing near him was standing at the edge of an unseen abyss. "You belong together," the queen continued, her voice soft but unstoppable. "By law of the ancients, by promise unbroken, and by the threads of fate that bind this city, you were betrothed long before your birth. This was not a choice of my making, it is the will of destiny itself. Do not defy it, for defiance will bring suffering to more than yourself." Her hands shook and she sank to one knee, the weight of realization pressing down on her. Every lesson she had been taught about humans, every story of their supposed fragility, every argument she had used to convince herself she was superior, it all crumbled in an instant. She felt the sting of shame, not for being wrong, but for the arrogance that had blinded her to a truth so simple yet so impossible. The human finally spoke, his voice gentle but filled with quiet authority. "I do not seek to force you nor to claim anything by power. I am here to stand by your side if you choose it. The path ahead is yours, but you will not walk it alone." Her breath caught in her throat. She had imagined humans as weak, as something to manipulate, something to dismiss. Yet here was one, calm and resolute, offering not control but partnership. She could feel the strength in his words, the power of a human mind unafraid of fate, a heart willing to shoulder burdens no alien could imagine. A wave of conflicting emotions surged through her. Pride screamed at her to refuse, to stand alone, to show that no human could define her life. Fear warned her that destiny was cruel and that the stakes were higher than she could comprehend. And yet, beneath it all, something warmer, something fragile, stirred. A sense of possibility, of unity, of a strength she had never known. She rose slowly, trembling, her golden patterns glowing faintly in the dim hall. "If this is true, if destiny truly binds us, then I must learn to accept it," she said, her voice soft, almost breaking. "But do not think for a moment that I will yield because you stand there. I must understand. I must know if you are worthy of this bond." The human nodded once, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Then I will show you. Not by words, not by promises, but by action. I will prove it in ways that matter, in ways you cannot ignore." The queen watched them both, her eyes sharp but tinged with pride. "Very well," she said. "Let the trials begin, for only through fire and choice will the bond be honored." The young noblewoman felt a shiver run down her spine. She had expected defiance to be her shield, but now she realized that this human was not an obstacle. He was a force that would reshape her understanding of strength, courage, and loyalty. And somewhere deep inside, a part of her dared to hope that perhaps humans were not so fragile after all. In that moment, the hall seemed smaller, the violet sun outside dimmer, and the world itself quieter, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Two destinies, once separate, were now entwined, and neither could predict what trials lay ahead. The trials began the next day, under the alien sky that burned with a strange mix of gold and violet. The young noblewoman walked beside the human warrior through the outer gardens of the queen's palace, where plants twisted into shapes that gravity and streams flowed with water that shimmered like liquid glass. She was tense, alert, her eyes constantly scanning, her mind already plotting how she could outmaneuver him. She could not allow herself to be bested, not yet. The human said nothing at first, his calm presence like a rock in the center of a storm. He did not seem concerned with her attempts to assert dominance or test him with questions that were meant to provoke doubt. He simply observed the world around him and waited, as if time itself bent to his patience. The first trial came quickly. A group of alien sentinels emerged from the garden paths, their bodies covered in armor that seemed alive, shifting, and gleaming with energy. Their task was simple: test the strength and teamwork of the pair. But it was far more complex than it appeared. The young noblewoman tensed, ready to strike first, to take control of the battle before the human could act. She expected hesitation from him, perhaps confusion at the alien rules or the strange abilities of the sentinels. Instead, he moved with precision, his body flowing in ways that seemed impossible for a human. Each step was deliberate, each movement measured, yet filled with speed and force. He blocked attacks with his bare hands, avoided blows that could have shattered bone, and guided her without a word, subtly positioning her to strike at the exact moment. She found herself following him, almost against her will, learning to trust his instincts even when her pride screamed to resist. "You are different from what I expected," she admitted during a brief pause, her chest heaving. "I thought humans were weak, untrained, but you—" "I have learned to survive," he replied simply, brushing dust from his tunic. "Strength is not only muscle, it is patience, observation, and understanding your enemy before they understand you." Her respect grew, though she fought against it. She did not want to rely on a human, yet she could not deny the truth she saw. His ability to read danger, to anticipate the impossible, was unmatched. Slowly, she began to mirror his movements, letting her attacks follow the rhythm he set. The sentinels fell one by one, unable to predict the harmony between them, even though they had underestimated the human alone. After the battle, silence fell over the garden. The young noblewoman stared at him, a whirlwind of emotions twisting inside her. Frustration, admiration, confusion, and a tiny spark of something she had never felt before: trust. The human did not gloat, did not speak words of pride. He simply extended a hand to her, steady and patient, as if offering a bridge across the chasm her arrogance had built. Before she could react, the queen's voice echoed through the garden. "You both have passed the first trial," she said. "But strength alone is not enough. The path ahead will test your heart, your judgment, and your loyalty to one another. Only then will the bond be proven." Her chest tightened. The queen's words were a warning and a promise. She realized that the trials would not be about defeating sentinels or wielding weapons. They would test the deepest parts of her character, the parts she had kept hidden even from herself. And the human warrior would not simply follow her lead. He would challenge her in ways that forced her to grow, to bend, to accept that she could not face the world alone. That evening, under the twin moons of the alien sky, they trained together in silence. Each movement, each maneuver built trust without words. Her pride whispered that she was yielding too much, that dependence on a human was weakness. Yet a deeper part of her, the part that had felt the pull of his calm strength in the hall the day before, began to soften, to recognize that true power could come not from isolation, but from unity. She did not admit it, not yet. But every glance at him, every shared movement, chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. She felt her heart stirring, uncertain and unsteady, yet drawn toward him. The human warrior, who had once seemed fragile and ordinary, was becoming a force she could not ignore, a presence that reshaped her world in ways she could not have imagined. And somewhere in the palace, the queen watched, her eyes sharp but kind. She knew the trials would be difficult, perhaps impossible, and yet she allowed them to unfold. For only when fire and doubt touched the heart could the bond of fate be truly forged. The young noblewoman clenched her fists, tasting the sweat and exhaustion of the day. She hated that she felt exhilaration, that she wanted to see the next challenge, that a human, of all beings, had begun to change her. But she could not deny it. Something deep inside her had shifted. Something new, dangerous, and undeniable was stirring, and it terrified and thrilled her at the same time. The next trial was unlike anything the young noblewoman had ever faced. The queen led them to a vast arena, carved from living rock that pulsed faintly with energy. The air hummed with tension, charged as though the arena itself were alive, sensing the weight of the test. She could see creatures lurking in the shadows, beings born of nightmares, with claws that scraped the stone floors and eyes that glowed with predatory intelligence. "This trial is of trust," the queen announced, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "You will face the unknown. You must rely not on strength alone, but on one another. If either of you falters, the consequences will be severe." The young noblewoman felt a chill run through her spine. She had faced monsters before, yes, but always alone, always in control. Now every step she took would intertwine with the human's actions. She hated the idea of depending on him, hated even more that a part of her wanted to. The human stepped beside her, silent, steady. "We face this together," he said, his tone soft but certain. "No tricks, no games, just focus on what's in front of us." Her pride bristled, but she nodded. Words were unnecessary. The battle ahead demanded movement, instinct, and trust. The first creature lunged from the shadows, a massive predator with sinewy limbs and a jagged, tooth-filled maw. She struck instinctively, her blade cutting through the air, but it was the human's quick reflex that saved her. He deflected the creature's swipe with a precision she had never seen in a human before, his movements fluid, controlled, and lethal. "You wait too long," she snapped, frustration rising. "You could have been hit." "I trust you to move when you need to," he replied calmly. "Don't act for me, act for yourself." She froze, then realized he was right. Her instincts had been clouded by pride and doubt. She adjusted, letting herself move in harmony with him instead of against him. The creatures came faster, more vicious, but with each encounter their coordination grew. She began to notice the subtle cues in his movements, the way his eyes scanned the arena, the way he anticipated danger without fear. Hours passed, yet they did not falter. The creatures pressed them to their limits, but together they began to adapt, their actions flowing seamlessly, an unspoken conversation in motion. Sweat dripped from her brow, her chest heaving with exhaustion, but something deeper burned inside her, a recognition of power, not brute strength, but human resilience and intelligence. Finally, the last beast fell, collapsing into a heap of shadows that dissolved into the arena floor. The young noblewoman sank to her knees, breathing hard, her arms trembling from effort. She looked at the human warrior, expecting him to show fatigue, yet he stood steady, calm, and unwavering, as if the trial had been nothing more than a walk in a garden. "You were incredible," she admitted, her voice low. "I thought humans were fragile. I thought you would falter." He smiled faintly. "I do not falter because I choose not to. Strength is not only in fighting, it is in standing when others would fall, in seeing clearly when chaos surrounds you." Her chest tightened. She had always believed strength was dominance, aggression, control. But now she saw another kind of strength, a quiet, deliberate power that did not need to shout or strike to be feared. And with it came the realization that she had underestimated him completely. Before she could reflect further, the queen's voice filled the arena again. "You see now why destiny has chosen this bond. Strength alone does not define a warrior, nor does arrogance define a noble. Together, you are more than either of you could be alone." A strange mix of emotions swirled within her. Awe, respect, frustration, and something she had never allowed herself to feel. Admiration, and perhaps even the beginning of trust. She hated that she felt drawn to him, hated that she wanted to rely on his presence, and hated the warmth that crept into her chest every time he moved close enough for her to sense it. "You make this impossible," she whispered when they were alone, the arena now empty but still humming faintly with residual energy. "I did not make it impossible," he said gently. "You made it possible for both of us." For the first time, she allowed herself a small, reluctant smile. Pride and stubbornness still fought within her, but a seed had been planted. The trials were not merely about survival. They were about connection, understanding, and the unyielding strength that came from standing together. And somewhere deep in her heart, she began to wonder if perhaps this human warrior, this being she had once dismissed as fragile, could teach her more about courage, loyalty, and destiny than any alien mentor ever could. The twin moons rose again over the palace, casting a gentle light on two figures, still standing side by side, bound by trial, fate, and the stirrings of something neither had expected, but both could no longer ignore. The next morning, the young noblewoman awoke to a sky painted in bruised shades of orange and purple, the first light of dawn spilling across the alien city. Despite the previous day's victories, a strange unease tugged at her chest. The trials had revealed strength she never expected to see in a human, yet they also exposed her own vulnerabilities, emotions she could not control, feelings she could not deny. She tried to push them away, but every time she saw the warrior, every time he moved beside her with calm precision, the pull returned. The queen's messenger arrived swiftly, an elegant creature with wings that shimmered like liquid silver. "The next trial awaits," it announced. "It will test your judgment and your heart. The bond you share will either strengthen or shatter under its weight." The noblewoman's fingers tightened around the hilt of her blade. She was beginning to realize that these trials were not merely physical. They were psychological, emotional, and moral. She did not know if she was ready to confront them, yet the human stood beside her silently, his presence a quiet assurance that she could not ignore. They were led to a canyon, deep and jagged, where the wind howled like the cries of lost spirits. The ground was unstable, the cliffs slick with dew, and at the center of the canyon was a narrow bridge suspended high above an abyss that seemed to stretch into eternity. On the bridge waited an alien creature, tall and imposing, its body glowing with an inner light. Its voice, when it spoke, resonated deep in her bones. "This trial is not about strength," it said. "It is about choice, sacrifice, and trust. Only one may cross first. The other must wait, bound by the promise to follow." The noblewoman's heart raced. Her instincts screamed to act alone, to prove that she could master every challenge without relying on a human. Yet the human looked at her with the same steady gaze that had guided her through every previous trial. "We face this together," he said simply. "We take the first step side by side, or not at all." Pride warred with reason. She wanted to refuse, to show that dependence on him was unnecessary. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized that this was not a contest. It was a lesson, a test of courage, yes, but also of understanding, of letting go of fear and arrogance. Slowly, she nodded, stepping onto the bridge. The bridge trembled beneath their weight. The creature's gaze followed them, testing their resolve. Winds lashed at their faces, threatening to throw them into the abyss below. Her grip on her sword tightened, yet her other hand brushed against his, intentionally or not. A shiver ran down her spine, not from fear, but from the unexpected comfort of his presence. Halfway across, a section of the bridge gave way. The noblewoman froze, instinct screaming, but the human caught her, steadying her with effortless strength. "Trust me," he said, voice calm and firm. She nodded, heart pounding. Together they pressed forward, each step a negotiation between fear and faith. When they finally reached solid ground on the other side, the noblewoman collapsed, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. She looked at him, and for the first time, pride had no place. Only gratitude and an uneasy, thrilling realization that she could not have crossed alone. The creature bowed its head. "You have passed the trial. You have proven that strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it together." The young noblewoman looked at the human warrior, a flush rising to her cheeks. She had always thought humans were weak, fleeting, and fragile. Now she could not imagine anyone more capable, more steadfast, or more unshakable. Yet beneath her admiration lay another feeling, a dangerous one that whispered that he was no longer merely a warrior by her side, but a force that could shape her very heart. She wanted to speak, to acknowledge the truth she felt stirring inside her, but words failed. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes meeting his. In that gaze, unspoken yet powerful, there was an understanding. The trials were not just tests. They were shaping their bond, forging trust, and challenging her to accept that destiny could be stronger than pride. The queen appeared then, her regal presence radiating warmth and authority. "You see now," she said softly, "why the threads of fate have entwined you. Strength alone is meaningless without trust, courage, and unity. Only together can the impossible become possible." The young noblewoman's chest tightened. She wanted to deny it, to assert herself, to reclaim her independence. But a part of her, one she could no longer ignore, knew that she was changing. She had begun to understand that the human beside her was not a rival, not a mere warrior, but a partner in every sense that mattered. As the sun rose fully, spilling golden light across the canyon, she felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her. And somewhere deep inside, a seed of something powerful had taken root. Trust, admiration, and perhaps the first stirrings of something she could not yet name, but that would shape her heart forever. The days that followed were quieter in appearance, yet the tension between the young noblewoman and the human warrior grew with each passing hour. They trained together, spoke together, and sometimes walked in silence beneath the alien moons, but a subtle shift had taken hold. She could no longer see him as merely a human. He had become a force she relied on, a presence that challenged her arrogance and yet made her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life. The queen summoned them one evening, her eyes filled with a seriousness that made the noblewoman's stomach twist. "Tonight," the queen said, "you will face the trial that tests the soul. Many have failed here, not because of strength, but because they could not confront their own hearts. You must do more than fight monsters or cross chasms. You must reveal your truths to each other." The noblewoman's mind raced. She had never considered that the trials would demand vulnerability, that she would have to expose the fears, desires, and doubts she kept hidden even from herself. She glanced at the human warrior. His calm expression betrayed nothing, yet she sensed the depth of patience and understanding behind it. The trial took them to a crystal chamber, walls shimmering with soft blue light. The floor reflected their images endlessly, as if the chamber itself wanted them to see every possible version of themselves. A voice echoed around them, soft but commanding. "You must tell each other what you fear most. Only then can your bond endure. Only then will your destiny align." The noblewoman swallowed hard. She had always been proud, taught to hide weakness, to manipulate perceptions. She had never shared fear with anyone, not with her peers, not with mentors, not even with the queen. Yet here, in the quiet glow of the chamber, with the human standing silently beside her, she felt the walls of her pride beginning to crumble. I am afraid," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I am afraid of losing control, of being vulnerable, of relying on someone else and finding that I am not strong enough to survive." She looked down, ashamed. "I have always believed strength meant never needing anyone, but now—" Her voice faltered. She glanced at him, her eyes searching for understanding. The human reached out, gently lifting her chin so that her gaze met his. "It is not weakness to rely on someone you trust. It is courage. True strength is standing together when everything tells you to stand alone. I am not here to take your power from you, but to share it. To walk beside you, not ahead of you, not behind." Her chest tightened. For the first time, she realized that her heart, which had always fought against humans and destiny alike, was beginning to soften. She had feared dependence, feared losing herself, yet the idea of walking alone now felt empty, hollow. There was a bond here, unspoken but undeniable, that went beyond training, trials, or fate. The human hesitated, then spoke with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I have faced battles that should have broken me. I have seen people fall and worlds crumble, yet nothing has mattered more than the chance to protect those I care about. You are someone I cannot abandon, even if the universe demands it." Her eyes widened. She had never expected such honesty, such raw emotion from him. She felt a warmth in her chest, a fluttering she could not ignore. Pride still whispered that she should step back, that humans were still fragile, that destiny was cruel, but her heart knew better. She wanted him beside her, wanted to trust him, wanted to feel the unspoken bond that had been building since the first trial. I don't know if I can say it yet," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I feel it. I feel the bond. I feel something I have never allowed myself to feel before, and it terrifies me." He nodded as if he understood completely. "Then we take it one step at a time. Fear does not vanish, but courage grows when you face it together. That is what the Queen wants you to understand. That is what the trial demands." They stood side by side, hands almost touching, hearts pounding in quiet unison. The chamber seemed to hum around them, the crystal walls amplifying the fragile connection between them. It was not the end of the trials, but something more profound had begun. A trust forged in danger, in patience, in vulnerability, and perhaps something deeper, something that neither could name but both could feel. The queen appeared again, her regal presence glowing in the soft light. "You have begun to understand," she said. "Strength, courage, and love are not separate. Only when you embrace all three can you fulfill the destiny set before you." The young noblewoman swallowed, a mix of awe, fear, and anticipation curling through her. She looked at the human warrior, and for the first time she felt that the impossible might be possible. Together, they could face anything, trials, monsters, or destiny itself. And in the quiet of the crystal chamber, under the alien moons reflected endlessly in the walls, she realized that her life, her heart, and her fate had shifted forever. The final trial dawned in silence. The palace was bathed in pale silver light as the twin moons hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the city. The young noblewoman felt her chest tighten with anticipation. Every trial had tested her body, her mind, her heart. But this one, she sensed, would test everything at once: courage, trust, and the strength of the bond she had so reluctantly begun to accept. The queen awaited them at the edge of a vast cliff, where the wind screamed like a living thing. Below, jagged rocks jutted from the depths, and a river of molten energy carved a glowing scar through the darkness. "This is the final test," the queen announced. "You must leap together without knowing what lies below. Only trust and unity will carry you safely." The young noblewoman froze, staring at the abyss. Her instincts screamed to pull back, to protect herself, to refuse. Fear clawed at her mind, and yet beside her the human warrior's presence was calm, unwavering. He reached out a hand, not demanding, not urging, but offering. A silent promise that he would not let her fall. I can't see the bottom," she whispered, her voice tight with tension. "You don't need to," he said softly. "We fall together, and together we rise." Her pride battled her reason. She had always been taught to face the impossible alone, to rely on her skill and strength. Yet every trial, every step had taught her something new, that strength without trust was fragile, and trust without courage was meaningless. She nodded slowly, her fingers brushing against his as she took his hand. The wind whipped around them, the cliff trembling beneath their feet. They counted to 3, hearts beating in unison, and then leapt. For a moment there was only air and fear. Her stomach lurched, and she squeezed his hand, surprised by the fierce comfort it brought. He held her steady, and the bond between them, forged in fire, battle, and trust, guided them downwards. The world seemed to stretch and twist, yet they did not fall apart. She realized in that suspended instant that this was more than survival. It was unity. Every moment of fear, every trial, every quiet glance, every shared step had led to this leap. And for the first time, she felt not the terror of falling, but the exhilaration of trusting fully, completely, without hesitation. When they landed, the ground beneath them solid and glowing, the noblewoman collapsed to her knees, trembling, gasping for breath. The human knelt beside her, steady as ever, yet with a faint smile that spoke of shared triumph. She looked into his eyes, and in them she saw not just a warrior, but a reflection of her own heart, courageous, determined, and alive with emotion she had herself for so long. The queen stepped forward, her presence like sunlight cutting through shadow. "You have passed the final trial," she said. "Not through strength alone, nor skill alone, but through trust, courage, and unity. You have proven that destiny is not a chain, but a bond. You have chosen each other, and in doing so, you have become unstoppable." Tears pricked the noblewoman's eyes. She had resisted, doubted, and feared humans, yet here she was, standing with one at her side, her hand in his, her heart open for the first time. I understand now," she whispered. "Not just the bond, but what it means to trust, to rely on someone who is not like me, and yet who completes me." The human's gaze softened, and he spoke with the quiet certainty that had guided her through every trial. "You were never meant to face this alone. We are stronger together. I am yours as you are mine by destiny, choice, and trust." The words settled over her like warm sunlight. Pride no longer demanded control. Fear no longer whispered doubt. She felt something deeper, something unbreakable, rising within her. She stood, her hand tightening around his, and she met his eyes with a courage she had never known she possessed. The queen smiled, her voice filled with satisfaction and pride. "Go," she said. "The world is vast, the trials are done, and your destiny awaits. Together nothing can stand against you." The noblewoman exhaled, her chest light, her heart full. She had begun the journey with doubt and defiance, believing humans were weak, believing she could face destiny alone. But now, standing beside the human warrior who had become her partner, her protector, and perhaps the first true companion of her heart, she understood the truth. Strength is nothing without trust, courage nothing without love, and destiny nothing without choice. As the twin moons shone above, the city below seemed smaller, gentler, as if recognizing the bond that had been forged in fire and fear. She stepped forward, hand in hand with the human warrior, ready to face whatever the universe had left for them. For the first time, she felt complete, not alone, not invincible, but united. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet, undeniable joy took root, echoing the promise that they had not only survived the trials, they had discovered the impossible power of unity, trust, and love. The horizon glowed with possibility, and together they walked forward, ready to shape the future.